Hello students, I believe all of you have finished your mains well, and today's political science paper, I feel the paper was very good, the type of a paper which is expected at UPSC level, and again I can say that students need not to look into any material beyond the class discussions, class notes and the test series. Today I will first try to discuss Indian government and politics section because at times students always have this concern that how to differentiate between the GS answers and the political science answers. My only suggestion is only look at the question asked, because always the nature of the questions are going to be different. The questions in political science will always be analytical based on the fundamental concepts, and the questions in the current will be more questions in GS will be more current oriented and will have more micro view, and in political science it is more of a macro view. So there is no need to refer lot of material, there is need more to give time to the notes and have some sort of contemplation and the thinking process. So let us see the section B. Question number 5A. The Constitution of India is a product of a historical process rich with constitutional antecedents. So, constitutional antecedents means there have been a lot of things which have been taken in the present constitution from the previous constitutions. So the constitution, the question is saying Constitution of India is a product of historical process, and there have been many constitutional antecedents. Fine. Since it is a 5-marker question, you have to write lot many things in a limited words. So you should have a capacity to understand what is to be included and what is to be excluded. So basically try to use the facts as a reference and try to give more analysis of the facts. So always simplify the question, understand what is the crux of the question. The crux of the question is historical underpinnings of Indian Constitution. Okay, so what you can say now, you have to emphasize on the key words. It is a historical process. The Constitution of India is a historical process. I always recommend students two things. If it is a short note, don't go for very extra introduction, and the second thing is if you can adopt the comparative perspective. So here what I will say is I can start with the comparative perspective, that whereas the Constitution of China, which is a product of revolution, reflect a distinctive break from the past. Indian Constitution is a example of continuity with change. It is an example of continuity with change. Fine. So you can say that in India, there was no violent overthrow of the old system. Fine. Rather, what we see, there is a continuation of the legacy. Continuation of the legacy. Fine. And we can say that the main structure of the Indian Constitution has been drawn from the Government of India Act 1935. For example, give some example. For example, the nature of federation, the institution of governor, the form of government, ordinances and others. So substantiate it. Fine. At the same time, Indian Constitution has been a cosmopolitan constitution. You can always talk about that Pratap Bhanu Mehta in his Oxford Handbook of Indian Constitution. Since it is a short note, you can leave it. You can say that it is also a cosmopolitan constitution reflecting the cross currents of the various constitutional visions. Fine. So it has also borrowed features from the British Constitution, British Constitution, American Constitution. If you want, you can write in bracket parliamentary system, American Constitution, the institution of vice president, etc. France, concept of republic, Weimar Constitution of Germany. And you can say that, and at times it is because of this, at times it is also known as the bag of borrowings. Fine. Then you come back to the question. Thus, we can say that it is the product of the historical processes, because the very idea of the constitution and constitutionalism started with the British rule in India. At the same time, in other countries, constitutions are product of revolution, but our constitution, Indian constitution, is unique because it itself ushers into a revolution as mentioned by Granville Austin. So towards the end, you can go beyond the question. You can say it is true, it is a result of historical antecedents, primarily the Government of India Act 1919, 1935, which forms the basic structure, but as well as from the earlier constitutions, but at the same time it has some of its unique and novel features. And most importantly, if other constitutions are products of revolution, Indian constitution is itself a means of bringing a social revolution, and in bracket you can talk about Granville Austin. Now let us go to the next question. So there is always one generic question on Indian constitution, like earlier they asked the question Indian constitution as a lawyer's paradise. So this question required more of a writing skill, a simple question. Now the next question is, constitution makers faced the great task of forging a common national identity in the face of unparalleled social and cultural diversity in India. Comment. So earlier question was also comment. Comment means you give your own point of view on this particular statement. Is it correct or not? Here you don't have to just explain, you have to comment on this particular statement. The constitution makers faced the great task of forging a common national identity in the face of unparalleled social and cultural diversity in India. This particular question, this question is from which topic? Constituent Assembly. So what is the question? The constitution makers faced the great task. The constitution makers faced the great task of forging a common national identity in the face of unparalleled social and cultural diversity in India. And the question is comment. Comment means on the statement which is given here, you give your own point of view. So first of all, you have to make a point that you have to, this question is about the Constituent Assembly and the tremendous task which they have done, and it was never easy to formulate the constitution for a country like India. Fine. So how could Constituent Assembly achieve this particular work? How could they accomplish this particular task, which was so difficult? Fine. So you can have a very good blend of the concept as well as certain facts related to the Constituent Assembly. We can say is constitutionalism oblique the rule of law. The other founding principle is liberalism as reflected in the form of government we have adopted, that is parliamentary democracy, and in the chapter of fundamental rights. Second, you have or you can also say next founding principle is secularism, and the unique model of Indian secularism, which does not exclude religion from the state, rather which is based on the principled distance model. Fine. Next, the concept of welfare state and democratic socialism, which is found in part 4. Then multiculturalism, because we provide a special protection to the rights of minorities. Next, federalism, and especially asymmetrical federalism to address the huge diversity. Fine. So these were some principles, but you can write beyond that these principles, even the principles of pacifism, that is supporting the international law found in Article 51, the principles of environmentalism found in both directive principles of state policies and fundamental duties, the principles of Gandhism reflected in Panchayati Raj, reflected in the cottage industries, the concept of cooperatives and protection of the cattle or milk breeding animals, etc. So Indian Constitution is a combination of the various principles inspired by India's rich tradition, India's struggle for independence, and then you can add from your side towards the closure of the answer that the rationale has been to give a life of dignity to the people living in India and as a as a member of the Constituent Assembly, they were very much aware of the tremendous task of nation building ahead and the response India's rise, or India as a responsible nation in the international community. So we have vehemently opposed the fascistic principles, racism, etc., and our constitution is having such ideologies, such principles, such philosophies which are the need of an hour. For example, environmentalism is there, multiculturalism is there. So this is how you can answer the various philosophies. Or principles. And you can always say that, as mentioned in the preamble, the basic idea has been behind these principles is what is the basic idea behind these principles? Two ideas. First is to promote unity and integrity, and second is to give a life of dignity. And as Gandhi always mentioned, that the Swaraj is not going to be just the transfer of power. Swaraj should result into giving every person a life of dignity. So you have Gandhism there, multiculturalism, secularism, federalism, constitutionalism, as well as liberalism. Now analyze the Marxist perspective of the nature of Indian national movement. So analyze. Let me show here the next question. Analyze the Marxist perspective of the nature of Indian national movement. Fine. Of Indian national movement. Fine. So since it is a short note, you should start directly with the Marxist perspective, and you can say that within the framework of Marxism, nationalism is seen as a bourgeois concept. Fine. So the Marxist perspective of the mainstream national movement and independence or freedom struggle begins with Karl Marx himself. Fine. And Karl Marx reflected Eurocentrism when he held that the revolt of 1857 was a feudal revolt. Fine. Later on, M.N. Roy, in his book India in Transition, has analyzed the role of Gandhi and Congress, and he held that the so-called Indian national movement is more of a bourgeois movement, and he considered Gandhi's political program to benefit the Indian bourgeois class as well as the metropolitan bourgeois, but it is not in the interest of the people. Later on, scholars like Rajni Palm Dutt, in his book India Today, and A.R. Desai, in his book Social Background of Indian National Movement, has highlighted the bourgeois character of Indian national movement. Fine. However, you can say Marxist scholars like Sumit Sarkar, in his book Modern India, has warned the orthodox Marxists not to have a very casual approach, and he believes that though Indian National Congress didn't have any specific program for masses, but there was no, like, they have not purposefully neglected the masses. Fine. And however, if we go by Bipin Chandra, who in his book India's Struggle for Independence, despite being a Marxist scholar, has acknowledged that the movement led by Gandhi has been one of the most spectacular mass movement whose warmth is felt even today. Fine. So, towards the conclusion, you can write, thus, not only the nature and the character of Indian national movement has been a matter of contestation among the different schools of historiography, from nationalist to subaltern. Within Marxism also, there is a lack of consensus. And you can always say that it is to be mentioned that Lyotard, a postmodernist scholar, has always emphasized that we should not confine our understanding to one grand narrative, rather we should take into consideration the multiple narratives. So this is how you can give the theoretical input to your answer. Now, underline the significance of the first constitutional amendment. Fine. So the first constitutional amendment and its significance. Fine. So here, if you want, you can give the theory of the amendments. You can say that amendments are, or this can be mentioned with reference to Pandit Nehru, who held that amendments are the essential features of written constitution because they act as a safety valve. So constitutions are supposed, give the theory of constitutions. So ideally constitutions are supposed to be rigid, but the element of flexibility has to be there to avoid the rigidity and to bring the constitution in sync with the aspirations of the people. And as rightly mentioned by Pandit Nehru, the amendments acts as the safety valve. Fine. So Pandit Nehru held that amendments are the essential features. And then if you want, you can give some idea about the system of amendment. And you can say that Indian Constitution provides a combination of the rigid and the flexible provisions of amendment, and though some provisions can be amended by simple majority, but for majority of the provisions the procedure is mentioned in Article 368. The procedure of amendment is mentioned in Article 368. Now the question is the significance of the first constitutional amendment. Fine. So according to Andre Bete, we can say that India is a unique case where constitution had to be amended within the very first year of the existence of the republic. So according to according to Andre Bete, fine, and the historical background in which the First Amendment Act was introduced was the Champakam Dorai Rajan case, the first case involving the dispute between fundamental rights and the directive principles. As a part of the amendment, Article 15 Clause 4 was introduced, which enabled a state to make the special provisions in favor of the socially and the educationally backward classes of India. Besides this, the First Amendment Act has also introduced exceptions, new exceptions in Article 19 Clause 1 with respect to freedom of speech and expression. Fine. First Amendment Act had also introduced exceptions like Article 31A and 31B. Article 31 introduced the 9th schedule. So this is how first you give the description. Now, what is the significance? The significance is that it has strengthened the socialistic nature of the Indian state. It has established that the directive principles of state policy, though not legally enforceable, nevertheless, we have to see the fundamental rights and the directive principles of state policy in the harmonious construction. And then the other significance is that it has also ignited the debate over the nature and the scope of the amending power of Parliament. Nature and scope of the amending power of Parliament. And the very first Amendment Act was challenged in the Shankari Prasad case, where Supreme Court has upheld the amending power of Parliament, and this shows that this was the time of the judicial passivity or judicial, yes, you can say judicial passivity, and the dominance of the legislature in the history of Indian politics. So two significance. First significance is about the litigation which later on culminated the story, or you can say the doctrine of basic structure has its origin in the First Amendment Act, which led to the questioning of the scope of the amending power of Parliament, and obviously it has resulted into the long-term implications for Indian constitutionalism as well as for Indian politics. Constitutionally reconciling the fundamental rights with the directive principles of state policy has led to the frequent amendments of the Constitution and judicial interventions. Comment. Fine. So you have to give your perspective whether this particular statement is correct or not. Fine. So you can always substantiate this. So what is the question? Constitutionally reconciling the fundamental rights and directive principles has led to the frequent amendments of the Constitution and judicial interventions. So, constitutionally reconciling the fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy has led to the frequent amendments of the Constitution and the judicial interventions. So, two things: whether frequent amendments of the Constitution are good or whether judicial interventions are good. What does the theory of the government suggest? Fine. And what does the theory of the Constitution suggest? The frequent amendments. Fine. So I will first open up this part and I will say that the constitutions form the fundamental law. Hence, by nature, they are supposed to be rigid. By nature, it should not happen that a government comes and it easily amends the constitution or changes the constitution. So by nature, constitutions are supposed to be rigid, and that is why it is often still told as a warning that we should not try to play with the constitution, because it is difficult to build the culture of constitutionalism. But at the same time, however, constitutions are supposed to be organic documents, hence have to be amended. For what? To meet the aspirations of the people or the generations. So first of all, try to give the theme and the theoretical basis. Again, judicial interventions. Fine. So ideally, and then you can link it, ideally constitutionalism. Ideally constitutionalism, I am not writing the complete spelling, demands that the three branches of government do not interfere in each other's task and ensure harmony and the balance. However, some special conditions may arise where it is not always possible to maintain the equilibrium. However, it is not always possible. And we have seen that under the power or garb of majoritarianism and populism, right, theoretically show your thinking process. So what happens is, here try to build the conceptual framework of the question, and then what is the question? Constitutionally reconciling the fundamental rights with the directive principles has led to the frequent amendments. Fine. So what you can say, that under the garb of majoritarianism and populism, at times the legislatures may go on to bend the essential features of the Constitution, and in this context, judiciary, which is seen as the guardian of the Constitution, in the countries with written constitutions, fine, arise to the occasion, resulting into judicial activism, or at times called as judicial intervention. And then you link with the question. Fine. So we can say the unique case of the extreme form of judicial intervention, which has culminated into the emergence of the doctrine of basic structure. Fine. One of the very important contribution of the Supreme Court in the field of jurisprudence, and as the demand of the question, you can explain. Fine. So the question is saying, constitutionally reconciling the fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy led to the intervention. So you have to first write how they differed and when this reconciliation had to be started. So you can say that the fundamental rights are based on the ideology of liberalism. It aimed to establish political democracy, grants certain fundamental rights with the objective to limit the powers of the state, with the objective to limit the powers of the state. Directive principles of state policy contain, or directive principles of state policy are contain or inspired by the ideas of democratic socialism, contains certain social and economic rights. It contains certain social and economic rights, fine, which aim to give a life of dignity. Now, since the two, you have to write why they came in contradiction, why they came in contradiction, point number 1, and what was the need for reconciliation. So why did they came into contradiction and what was the need of reconciliation? So you can say that they came into contradictions due to two reasons. What were these two reasons? Point number 1, based on two different or basically antithetical ideologies, liberalism versus socialism, and the other being the legal status, where fundamental rights have been given the superior legal status. Fundamental rights are the enforceable rights, where right to enforcement is itself a fundamental right. On the other hand, directive principles of state policy as per Article 37 are non-enforceable in the court of law, nevertheless important in itself, and each government has to implement them in their policies. So you have to show, analyze means your ability to show and understand the logic, and then you can say that these two contradictory provisions have led to the legal battle, and the very first case was Champakam Dorai Rajan case, where the fundamental right to equality, it was highlighted, has come into, or fundamental right to equality, and the special provisions, or you can write that the reservation policy pursued by the state of Madras has been challenged on the ground that it limits fundamental right to equality, and as per Article 13, any law which limits or abridges any of the fundamental right is to be declared void to the extent of inconsistency. Fine. So this has led to the legal battle, and ultimately judiciary has resolved it by suggesting that if directive principles have to be implemented and for which fundamental rights have to be made limited, this can be done not by the ordinary law but by bringing amendment. In this case, the judicial intervention can be called as judicial creativity, where they have given the creative interpretation of the term law used in Article 13 clause 2, which excluded the amendment from the definition and led the implementation of the directive principles remain legally valid. Fine. And then you can say that later on the scope of the amending power of parliament was questioned in the Shankari Prasad case, and with the judicial intervention this constitutional crisis was addressed. The another example, the next case is Golaknath case, and I need not to explain it in detail that how judicial intervention has tilted the balance in favor of fundamental rights, which was later on corrected in Keshwanand Bharti case, and then was further reiterated then in the Minerva Mills case. So you can say that it is, or you can say that since judiciary is the arbiter of the constitution, wherever there has been an ambiguity over the relationship between fundamental rights and directive principles, judiciary in India has risen to the occasion to address this ambiguity and to establish the and they have given the principle of harmonious construction so that the fundamental rights also remain relevant and directive principles also can be implemented. Fine. And then you can come back to the question that thus it can be said that the need for the reconciliation of the fundamental rights and directive principles have led to the frequent amendments and the judicial interpretation. So along with, you can mention about Champakam Dorai Rajan case, which has led to the First Amendment Act, which was challenged in Shankari Prasad case. Fine. Which later on led to Fourth Amendment Act, 17th Amendment Act, which was challenged in Golaknath case, which has led to 24th Amendment Act and 25th Amendment Act, which was challenged in Keshwanand Bharti case, which has led to 42nd Amendment Act, and the unconstitutional provisions were declared void in the Minerva Mills case. So easy, you just write the constitutional history and you can substantiate it. Now the next question is the role of President of India becomes more significant during a minority government and a coalition government. Explain. So if you have paid attention in the class where I explain the theoretical basis of all different forms of government, I am sure you would have done this question easily. So the role of President of India becomes more significant during a minority government and a coalition government. During a minority government and coalition government. Here they tell you explain them how this happens, how and why this happens. For this you will have to bring the theory of the government here. Fine. So the role of president in India becomes more significant during the minority government and the coalition government. In class notes, I have always emphasized on this angle. I hope you remember my analysis where I have cited Professor MP Singh. So what you can write, how will you write this answer? First of all, you talk about the form of government which we have adopted. So India has adopted which form of government? The parliamentary form of government. And in parliamentary form of government, you have two heads. Fine. One is the real and second is the nominal head. So in case of India, Prime Minister, or you can say the Council of Ministers headed by Prime Minister is the real head, whereas President is the nominal or the symbolic head. Prime Minister is called as the head of the government, whereas President is called as the head of the state. If you want, you can also explain the rationale behind the two heads is to provide the continuity in administration and to have a head who can be considered as above the party interests and who can represent the nation. And then you have to discuss about the role of president. Fine. So the role of president in India can be understood on the basis of Article 74 clause 2, and as per this, and which is in accordance to 42nd Amendment Act and the principles of the parliamentary form of government, which says that president is to act, you can say that president shall act on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. So president shall act on the aid and advice, because keep on analyzing and keep on giving logic and showing that you understand the theory of government, because constitution is based on the principle of collective responsibility. Fine. So president is more of a symbolic head. All works are done in the name of the president. And we can also mention, since he is a symbolic head, Article 361 grants immunity to the president, and president is not held responsible for any actions, rather it is the ministers who are held responsible. Now you have to come that how and why they arrive at more significance during the minority government and the coalition government. Fine. So first of all, you can define that the minority government represent a situation when no party has clear majority and the ruling party, here the ruling party does not have clear majority and it is sustained by the outside support. Similarly, coalition government arises when a single party does not have the sufficient majority to form the government, and thus two or more parties may combine together to form the government. Fine. So here you can say that the common thing in the minority and the coalition government is that no party gains majority in the elections, which is often expressed through the term of hung parliament. In this situation, the role of president becomes more important. The role of president becomes more important. If you want, you can compare it with the institution of governor. So we can say that the governors of states, fine, though modeled on the parliamentary system established at Union, is also the constitutional head, yet governors have greater discretionary powers than the president. Governors have the greater discretionary powers than the president. So ideally, there can be the governor's rule or president's rule in the state, but there is never an occasion when there is a president's rule at the center. Fine. So president does have some discretionary powers. For example, sending a bill back for reconsideration or sending the advice back for reconsideration. Try to bring the analytical points, but president's discretion is less in comparison to governor. However, in case of the minority and the coalition governments, president's role increases. And if I can mention Pratap Bhanu Mehta and Devesh Kapoor in their edited book on public institutions, they have mentioned that in case of coalition and minority governments, the power of the regulatory institutions like Supreme Court, like Election Commission, like CAG and President increases. The power of regulatory institutions increases. Fine. For example, President gains discretion in the formation of the government in case of coalition and minority government. However, at the union level, we have seen that healthy conventions have developed with respect to the formation of the government. And you can also write in comparative terms that according to Professor MP Singh, coalition government also weakens the position of Prime Minister. Hence, there is a relative rise in the position of President. Fine. So when there is a coalition government, Prime Minister does not enjoy the type of legitimacy which Prime Minister has in a majoritarian government. Obviously, the power gets tilted in favor of President because President gains the discretionary power. To explain how President acquires greater power in case of minority governments and the coalition governments, we can give reference to the views of the former President R. Venkat Raman. And R. Venkat Raman has clearly, who used to call himself as a copybook president, has clearly explained that the position of president in India is like a emergency lamp which comes to light only in emergency situations or when the mains switches off. So the main power lies with the Prime Minister, but in case of a coalition government, the power shifts into the hands of the President. So it can be said that it is true that coalition government establishes its own, especially due to the Prime Minister lacking the clear majority. Now the last sixth C question is, do you think that despite having significant limitations, the PRIs have strengthened the process of democratic decentralization? Give your views. So the question is, do you think that despite having significant limitations, the PRIs have strengthened the process of democratic decentralization? Give your views. Give your views. So do you think that despite having the significant limitations, PRIs have strengthened the process of democratic decentralization? So first of all, you have to write the importance of democratic decentralization. So you can say that democratic decentralization has now, there is a almost universal acknowledgement that there is no alternative to good governance then having a democratic decentralization, because good governance requires what? Good governance require transparency, accountability, and citizen, active citizenship or citizens involvement. So in this context, we have to evaluate the PRI's system. So first of all, you tell about the importance of the democratic decentralization, and you can say that the Panchayati Raj institutions, which have been given the constitutional status by 73rd Amendment Act, aimed at achieving the idea of democratic decentralization based on the Gandhian vision of the oceanic circles of power. So based on the Gandhian vision of the oceanic circles of power, where there is power is not exercised by one on the other, and everyone gets a life of dignity. So Panchayati Raj institutions has been projected as a revolutionary step towards strengthening the democratic decentralization in the country, and write some features. It led to the establishment of the three-tier Panchayati Raj at all level, the elected bodies. Most importantly, it created the institution of Gram Sabha, which can be considered as the heart and soul of experiment, representing the deliberative and the participatory democracy. So 73rd and 74th Amendment Act provides for 73rd provides for 11th schedule, regular for election, the special provisions for regular elections, provisions for state finance commission, DPCs, etc. So this is how you first explain. And then do you think that despite having significant limitations, so here we can connect that though projected as a revolutionary step, 73rd Amendment Act has created dissatisfaction to the extent it has been called as half-baked cake. Fine, it has been held that it creates the skeleton but does not infuse the flesh and blood. Here you can also mention about the Mani Shankar Iyer committee, which was constituted in context of the existence, like 20 years of existence, has given its report in 2013 about leveraging the Panchayati Raj in public service delivery, has highlighted that 73rd Amendment Act creates a weak, or it creates a bad Panchayati Raj, and he mentions that the bad Panchayati Raj is worse than the no Panchayati Raj. And then you mention about some fundamental weaknesses. The fundamental weaknesses is that no clear mapping of the functions of the three tiers on the basis of subsidiary principle. Then Gram Sabha has been created, but no, it does not mention the clear role, functions and responsibilities. A better provision related to Gram Sabha, which is in heart and soul of democracy, is found under a PSIR Act. It ensures the representation of SC and ST community, but does not ensure their participation. Similarly, the representation of the women is not yet in accordance to their population. The fundamental weakness of 73rd Amendment Act remains in terms of lack of provisions for adequate funds, functions and functionaries. You can write that the 11th schedule is more of a directive. The real powers continue to lie with the state legislatures, and it is said that there is no decentralization. It is more of an example of devolution of powers. It is more an example of devolution of powers rather than the decentralization. It's not a good example of decentralization. It is more an example of devolution of power. So by this time you have addressed significant limitations, and you can also say that DPCs have been the non-starters, and it has been suggested that these institutions need to be made the viable institutions by providing the funds, functions and functionaries. As of now, there is more of a political decentralization without the financial and the administrative decentralization. Now, the second part, the question is, despite this, it has strengthened the process of democratic decentralization. So you can say that nevertheless it cannot be said that it has been a waste journey. Fine. It has definitely strengthened the process of decentralization. Fine. You can say that if not adequate financial and administrative decentralization, we see it has resulted into the political decentralization. The biggest achievement is the creation of the uniform three-tier system of panchayats. In earlier situations, the time of panchayats was not fixed, elections were not regular. It does provide for the regularity of the elections. Fine. We see that the subsequent finance commissions have also strengthened the fiscal situation because a new mandate has been added to the Finance Commission to give suggestions to the Union government towards the financial empowerment of these institutions. And above all, we have seen that it has created a significant momentum in the rural areas. It has enhanced the awareness. It has positive implication with respect to the empowerment of the women. So basically it is high time, and especially we have seen how critical panchayats are or panchayats can be in fighting against the corona type of pandemics with respect to detection, with respect to establishment of the containment zones. So it is essential that the decentralization, which is right now more of a political decentralization, should be made comprehensive by giving adequate financial powers to them as well as the administrative powers. Because if we see a dream of India emerging as a major power, if we have a dream of India to emerge as a 5 trillion economy, if we have a dream of Gandhi where everyone lives with dignity, and if we have seen the dream of Tagore who says that let our country awake where head is held high, every expert committee and every expert analysis highlights the need for giving the complete powers or need for moving ahead with the decentralization in the true sense. Fine. So this is how you can answer this particular question. Now, let us see the next question, and I think I have always emphasized on this particular question, the relationship between party system and federalism. So I believe you must have done it well. The Indian party system is shaped by the complex interaction of country's federal structure, electoral system, and the social cleavages. Fine. So Indian party system is shaped by the complex interaction of countries' federal structure, electoral system, and social cleavages. So the question is on the Indian party system is shaped by a complex interaction of countries' federal structure, electoral system, and social cleavages. Fine. So here you can mention about scholars like Suhas Palashikar, and other people who write on the Indian party system. You can write about Zoya Hassan. So Indian party system. First of all, you have to write about the role of political parties. And here you can say that political parties are indispensable, or as suggested by Lasky, they are indispensable for the working of the representative democracy. You can write about Lasky and why they are indispensable. Plus, you have to write that they perform the function of interest aggregation. If we use a structural functional approach. And then from political parties, you have to write about party system, social cleavages. Fine. And you can say that according to Sartori, party system is shaped by not just the number of parties but parties having systemic relevance. Indian party systems are not shaped by the number of parties but the parties having systemic relevance. Fine. And then you have come to the main question that Indian party system is shaped by the complex interaction of countries' federal structure, electoral system and social cleavages, and you need to show how. Fine. So you have to first give a conceptual framework why Indian party system is said to have been shaped. So the conceptual framework is apply systems approach. So you can say that party system does not operate in vacuum. Rather, to quote Joseph La Pelumbra and Myron Wiener, it is shaped by the complex interaction of the various subsystems. It is shaped by the complex interpretation of the various subsystems. After giving this theory, you write about the unique nature of Indian party system. Fine. So that you can explain these three linkages. The unique nature of Indian party system. So what we can say that Indian party system is dynamic one, and Professor Suhas Palshikar has explained the evolution of Indian party system in two phases. For example, one party dominant system, fine. Then the majoritarian system. Then you can say that the coalition governments and the re-emergence of majoritarian system. So if earlier majoritarian system, he talks about one party system, the second he talks about the BJP system. So basically the broad trend, fine. So if I give reference to Professor MP Singh, Professor MP Singh, Indian party system reflect the trend of regionalization and fragmentation. The trend of regionalization and fragmentation. Now, to explain the complex interplay, we have to go for explaining, let us say, complex interplay of countries' federal system. The complex interplay of countries' federal system, to quote Professor MP Singh, primarily you can say has been a major factor behind the fragmentation of the regional parties, the fragmentation of regional parties, or a phenomena which he talks about, the regionalization of the party system. Fine. So obviously India is a vast and diverse country. The problem at regional level are different, the problem at national level are different. Even in elections, we see that the people may be voting for a different party at the state level and a different party at the national level. So federalism is primarily responsible for the fact of the fragmentation and the rise of regional parties. Now, the second thing is electoral system. Regarding electoral system and the party system, I hope you remember that I have often quoted the Duverger law, and as per the Duverger law, the majoritarian system results into two-party system, and the proportional representation as electoral system represents into results into the multi-party system and coalition governments. India is a unique case of the complex interaction where we do not find Duverger law is sufficient to explain this uniqueness. So ideally, India's majoritarian system should have stabilized the two-party system, but we see the trend either the system settles for one party dominant system, be it a Congress system or BJP system, or it goes for the multi-party system or the coalition government. Fine. Now, social cleavages play an important role. Fine. So, as far as the role of social cleavages on the party system, we can give reference to Zoya Hassan. And social cleavages always play an important role, and that is why the study of political parties is an important aspect of the political socialization, political sociology approach. So political parties, they are not operating in vacuum even in the Western countries. In Western countries, the prime social cleavages are class based, though the influence of religion is increasing. However, in case of India, as mentioned by Zoya Hassan as well as Paul Brass, social cleavages, they are more complex in nature. Why they are more complex? Because Indian politics is not unidimensional. Along with caste, along with class, we see the social cleavages in terms of caste and in terms of religion. So caste, class and religion, and not just the social cleavage in the form of class is relevant. So different political parties, especially the regional parties, can be associated with a particular caste and a particular religion. Situation is not very different as far as the national parties are concerned. So, towards the conclusion, thus India's party system reflects the unique situations, unique impact of the social environment in which it is placed, and in order to understand Indian party system, we must go for the systems approach and the political sociology approach to understand this complex interaction. Okay, so now the next question is, do you think there is a gradual shift in the basis on which demands for the creation of new states have been raised in the different regions of India? Explain. Fine. So the question is, do you think there has been a gradual shift? Do you think there has been a gradual shift in the basis on which the demand for creation of new states have been raised in the different regions of India? Direct question if you have studied the class notes. Fine. So the question is, do you think that there has been a gradual shift? There has been a gradual shift in the basis on which the demands for the creation of new states have been raised in the different regions of India. So if you see the state reorganization chapter, I have talked about Louis Tillin's book, Remapping India, and how that book presents different theories behind the state formation. So do you think there has been a gradual shift? So gradual shift means, point number one, first was the linguistic basis. Fine. Then in the northeast it was more of a ethnic basis in 70s, but from 90s and later on we see the discourse of development has guided first reorganization of the North Indian states, and creation of Uttarakhand, Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand, and then in case of Telangana. Fine. So the discourse has been shifted gradually. Fine. So the creation of new states. Here again, if there is a scope to bring the constitutional provisions, bring the scholars, so you can say that according to Louis Tillin, you can mention her book Remapping India. The internal map of India is yet not settled. Fine, is still the reconfigurations are going on. If we mention Vivek Debroy, he suggests that at least 50 new states, or at least India should have the 50 states. Then you can go into the historical approach, the formation, or you can say the reorganization of states on the linguistic lines goes to pre-independence time. Considering the fact that after independence the demand for the reorganization is bound to emerge, Constitution has provided a very flexible provision under Article 3. So write the detail of Article 3, that the new states can be created by separating the territory or by including the territory, and write the constitutional provisions. And then, as mentioned by Louis Tillin, there are 4 schools of thought behind the formation process of the states. The first school of thought is the sociological school, represented by Yogendra Yadav, who talks about that the depressed sections, they are looking for their identity. The second school of thought represented means political economy, represented by Atul Kohli, where he highlights the economic factor. For example, the new economic policy of liberalization may have been an important factor behind the creation of states like Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand. Again, the logic is ethnicity, or identity based issues. Fine, where we can mention about the scholars like Paul Brass or Myron Wiener, that certain movements, for example, Gorkhaland movement or the movements in Northeast, are driven by asserting the ethnic identity, and Louis Stillen itself believe that it is more of a political reasons, because most of the time states are created around elections. Then Louis Stillen also talks about the waves of state formation. So if we say 1960s linguistic basis of reorganization, if I talk about 70s and 80s reorganization on ethnic lines primarily of Northeast, in 21st century the development narrative, fine, first in case of UP, Bihar and MP, and then in case of Telangana. However, the ethnic issues will always be there. To conclude, Louis Stillen will also highlight that how the political factor have played the major role in deciding, and especially the electoral calculations of the ruling party at the center. But we can say that the formation of states in India is a complex interplay of the forces. As of now, the state formation in India is guided by the principles adopted by the State Reorganization Commission, which has given certain guiding principles that the primacy has to be given to the sovereignty and integrity, second to the ethnic consideration, next is the administrative and the economic angle. So try to bring these points. Now next question is, what explains India's modest improvements in social development outcomes even as the rate of growth has accelerated since the initiation of economic reforms? Fine. So the question is, what explains India's modest improvements in the social development outcomes even as the rate of growth has accelerated? Even as the rate of growth accelerated since the initiation of economic reforms. Fine. So you can say that India was notorious for the Hindu rate of growth, that is 3%. However, after the adoption of new economic policy, our rate of growth has jumped to the extent that India has been termed as a emerging economy, one of the fastest growing economies even in after COVID. But unfortunately, India's achievements or records have been modest in terms of social development. Fine. the studies by Oxfam, UNDP, and show that Sri Lanka or India's poorer neighbors like Sri Lanka and Bangladesh are the better performers on this particular account. Fine. So, what could have been the possible reasons? So, we can give many reasons behind such a scenario. First of all, the very ideology of neoliberalism, which has guided the reforms in 90s. We have to understand that the philosophy of neoliberalism is actually pro-rich rather pro-poor. And not just in India but around the world is had resulted into the concentration of the wealth. Fine. The second thing is India continues to be a soft state, that is, there is a prevalence of huge corruption, which also creates an impact. Fine. Then you can also say that, as suggested by Amartya Sen, fine, there has been a need to strengthen democracy. Government should have invested in the capacity building of the people. So government should have invested in a capacity building of the people, and without adequate democratic decentralization. And then you can also mention about Abhijit Banerjee also, that the faulty policies, not taking people at the center and not going for it. We can also give reference to the views that in India economic reforms moved ahead, but much needed political reforms have not matched. Once economic decentralization, you can say deregulation has happened, political decentralization should have also happened. We should have strengthened the institutions of democracy. We needed to strengthen the participation of the people. We did some actions like creation of panchayats, but we have not given enough power to these institutions. Fine. So we can say that complex interaction of the various forces. By and large, India continues to be an overdeveloped as well as the soft state. India continues to be a traditional society. There is lack of effective decentralization. The very philosophy of neoliberalism needs to be balanced by the capacity building efforts by the state governments, and at times certain norms like WTO norms on agricultural subsidies etc. have also constraints the hands of government of India. But you don't stop the answer here. You can always say it's high time we have to take the corrective steps. It is also very important that a renewed look is given to the land reforms to achieve the objective of the redistributive justice. So now, modest improvement is that economic growth, and again you can mention that as suggested by Amartya Sen, not only democracy is conducive to development, even development needs to be democratized. You need to promote the inclusive growth, and growth cannot be end in itself, as suggested by, even you can mention about Martha Nussbaum, that we have to invest in the capacity building. The model of development should not be where people are used as a means and growth is an outcome, where economic growth is a means and human development is an outcome. So first of all, the very philosophy of the development has to be changed, as well as the strategy of development has to be changed. We have to make a shift from neoliberal towards the social liberal approach, and from state-led development we have to go for the people-led development model. From top down we have to approach bottom up. We have to address the corruption, we have to bring transparency, and as mentioned in second ARC, we have to go for more citizen centric governance. Let's quickly do the last question. The success of electoral democracy can partly be attributed to the status and role of the election commission. Explain. Partly be attributed. Fine. So it can be attributed to others also. The success of electoral democracy can partly be attributed to the status and the role of election commission of India. और explain करना है कि in what way election commission has contributed to the success of India's electoral democracy. So here you can bring the theory that according to the elitist theory of democracy, the most important indicator of democracy is the free and fair electoral system. So democracy, if a country has free and fair electoral system, it is enough to regard that country as an electoral democracy. Fine. And then your case come to India. India can be seen as the most successful model of democracy in the third world. In the third world, India is. Now, the credit to the success of democracy can be attributed to many factors. For example, the constitution, find India's tradition, the values of Indian society, the experiment with parliamentary democracy during the British rule, and above all, the political will. However, one institution deserves the special mention, and that is the election commission. So, Election Commission of India has been recognized globally for the positive contribution it has made, at if not completely, which is obvious, partly towards the success of electoral democracy. And then you can say that we should give credit to the vision of the Constituent Assembly, which has created a unique institution like Election Commission. Perhaps no other country's constitution has this type of an institution. And then you can write about Article 324, from Article 324 to 329 in, I suppose, part 15, but I'm leaving. You can check, deals with the elections. Now, Election Commission has been entrusted with the power to conduct the free and fair elections of Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha, President, Vice President, and state legislatures. Fine. And then you can say that it enjoys vast powers, vast administrative powers with respect to the formation, with respect to the conduct of elections. You can talk about it also has a unique power in context of formation of electoral rolls, delimitation of constituencies. Some of the experts which Election Commission has taken on its own towards strengthening the democratic process is the provision for, or the practice of, enforcing the model code of conduct to establish the level playing field. So you can write about the vast, and it is why, and in the Election Commission's performance has been very good, to the extent that it has been often recognized even in the developed countries as the gold standard. We have to be thankful to the vision of the Constituent Assembly that they have ensured that autonomous, a fairly, it's not entirely autonomous, so you can always say a fairly autonomous Election Commission has been constituted, with the Chief Election Commission appointed by the President, and the method of removal is at par with the Supreme Court judges. So the two other election commissioners, they cannot be removed except on the recommendations. The terms and conditions are of the Chief Election Commissioner is also quite autonomous. Fine. So we can say that Election Commission enjoys huge respect, and as per the survey, it has been one of the favorite institutions of the people in India, besides CAG and Supreme Court. And to large extent, nobody has questioned the fairness, and you can always say that conduct of elections in India, where in the last, like for the last Lok Sabha, there were 90 crore voters, is not an easy task. Election Commission has established even an electoral booth even when there is a single voter. So definitely, because elections form the base of electoral democracy, representative democracy, and Election Commission has done an important role. Though at times there have been allegations that Election Commission has not been playing the role of a leveler, or it has been suggested that in the interest of the democracy in India, it is essential to make certain amendments, for example, with respect to the system of the appointment of the election commissioners, because it is still too much controlled by the political executive, and there is a need to change and reform the system of removal of the other two election commissioners. Fine. So you can say that election commission has played good role, and it is essential to for the legitimacy of the system that this unique institution should be made more powerful, so this will enhance the credibility of the institution. Fine. Now next question, examine the evolution of jurisdiction of Supreme Court as a constitutional court. So evolution of the jurisdiction of Supreme Court as the constitutional court. Fine. So you have to first of all understand what is a constitutional court. The constitutional court deals with the interpretation of the constitution, and it has the ultimate responsibility to protect the sanctity of the constitution. So the first task is that you are able to explain what exactly is the constitutional court, and you can say that article 132, 133 and other explain that Supreme Court is the ultimate arbiter of the constitution. So if you want to understand the evolution of the Supreme Court as a constitutional court, it has been very well established in the constitution. Now, post independence, we can say that in initial phases up till 1967, Supreme Court had all the powers of a constitutional court. It has played a role in the interpretation of the constitution, where especially where the substantial question of law was concerned, but its role as the guardian of the constitution was relatively weak. And since you can say, since Keshwananda Bharati case, when it has given the doctrine of basic structure, it has more confidently asserted the role of the guardian of the constitution as well as constitutionalism. Some important judgments like Menaka Gandhi judgment, the judgment on Puttu Swami case, which has clarified that Indian Article 21 of Indian Constitution includes right to privacy, etc. You can mention, and thus Supreme Court has evolved and has made a distinct mark as a constitutional court. Now you can also suggest a way forward that Supreme Court is overburdened. Either we should have, because it is also a court, highest court of appeal in both civil and the criminal cases. Hence, either we should create a separate constitutional court like exists in the Western countries like France or Germany, or we should establish a separate court of appeal. So there is a need to avoid the delays in the court's ordinary work. It has done an exemplary work as far as the constitutional court is concerned, but at times this work has been done at the cost of the disposal of the normal appeals or disposal of its normal business of appeals, etc. So there is a need to go for the separation and have either the separate highest court of appeal or some other institutions like exist in France, etc. Because at times, as a constitutional court, at times it has also been criticized for excessive judicial interventions. Now, how caste, last question, how caste as a social category is also becoming a political category in the democratic politics of India. So, how caste as a social category is also becoming a political category in the democratic politics of India. So, how caste as a social category also becomes a political category in the democratic politics of India. So this question you can start with the quote that it is said that in India people do not cast their vote, rather they vote their caste. And then you can also mention about, like, according to Christophe Jeffrey Lott, caste forms the mosaic of Indian politics. Fine. Then you have to tell the conceptual framework, and you have to tell that politics, if you go by the political sociology approach, politics do not operate in vacuum. It is shaped by the sociological factors. The most important sociological factor is obviously the caste. Fine. So as suggested by Ambedkar himself, that caste form the basic unit of the Indian / Brahminic society. Fine. So the caste has played a very important role, and which has been highlighted by scholars or political sociologists like Andre Bete, who has analyzed the role of caste in the politics of Tamil Nadu. Then Rudolph and Rudolph, who in their book In Pursuit of Lakshmi has highlighted the role of caste-based associations. However, the most important study on the role of caste has been of Rajni Kothari, who in his book The Role of Caste in Indian Politics has highlighted the phenomena of the politicization of caste. And Rajni Kothari, he holds the success of India's democracy on caste because caste provided the basis for the vertical and the horizontal mobilization. He also suggests that not only caste has impacted the politics, but politics has also impacted the caste, the phenomena which he talks about, the secularization of caste. The role of caste towards deepening of India's democratic politics has also been explained by Professor Yogendra Yadav when he talks about the democratic upsurge, and where he says that how the first democratic upsurge has led to the dominance of OBCs and second to the dominance of Dalits. There are scholars like Andre Bete, C.P. Bhamri, who believe that caste politics may give some electoral benefits in the short term, but it is detrimental for the national unity in the long term. But there are scholars like Rajini Kothari, Yogendra Yadav, Satish Deshpande who highlight that the caste do play a positive role towards bringing the power at the lower sections. Thus, we can say that caste is becoming an important political category to the extent that we also uses the phrases mandalization of Indian politics. You have caste-based elections, caste-based parties, caste-based political groups, caste-based mobilization, and obviously considering India as a prismatic society and caste as the basic unit of Indian society, we have to see that Indian politics is bound to be a communitarian one. I hope this discussion has helped you and will come up with few more discussions on this year's paper. Thank you.